Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. College football playoff matchups are set, and the fellas are taking a little early deep dive into the Sugar Bowl. Texas, Washington, Big 12 champ versus undefeated Pac-12 champ. And really, what excites me most about this matchup is two of these teams are just playing their best football to end the year. I mean, Texas, what they did against Texas Tech and what they did against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. We always said all year, we want to see this Texas team kind of reach that top gear and sustain that top gear. I think we've seen that the last 2 weeks. I think the committee saw that, happy to see them in there. And then the Washington Huskies kind of establishing that dominance. I mean, coming out of that first game against Oregon, a lot of people saying we think Oregon is the better team. Vegas thought they were 9.5 points better than the Washington Huskies. The Washington Huskies remind everybody why they are undefeated. I mean, as a college football fan, absolutely fired up about this matchup. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys, and your support for all these game breakdowns has been overwhelming. It's been amazing, and it gives us the opportunity to do what we do. So cannot thank you guys enough. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and more importantly, let us know in the comment section how you guys are feeling about this matchup. Early score predictions we'll certainly take. We'll chop it up there. Dill, going to give you the T-box, Texas, Washington. How are we feeling?
I mean, what you got in this matchup is one of the best offenses we've seen in a long time, especially when they're at their peak and they're all healthy in Washington Huskies, in a defense that is one of the better defense we've seen in a little while at Texas. So you got two absolute heavyweights.
Yes.
And that's not to say their respective counterparts, defense, offense for Texas and Washington aren't good. Like, these are two very complete teams, but have two units that are facing off that are two of the best we've seen in a while.
I 100% agree with that. Like, we all know what Michael Penix and Roman Dusnay and Jalen McMillan and God, I probably deserve to list probably that whole the 11-man offense.
Dylan Johnson's got to be in that after the couple games he's
100%. Like, this Washington offense, we know what they've been doing. One of the most explosive and efficient offenses in all of the country. Not enough people talk about how good this Texas defense is, right? A lot of the conversation goes to Quinn Ewers, the former, and he's like Quinn Ewers, Coach Sark. They're scheming up a great offense. It's not taking away anything from that offense, but this Texas defense is special. Now, I want to dive into that matchup first, and the biggest question I have is Washington, when they're able to protect Michael Penix, is, again, an offense that's pretty much impossible to stop. When you have an NFL quarterback, an NFL running back, 3 NFL wide receivers, maybe even more, you're going to get pieced up if you cannot affect Michael Penix. But you're looking at a Texas Longhorns defense that's been one of the most dominant defensive lines and pass rushes that we've seen in all of the country. And I think this is going to be the best defensive front that Washington has seen all season.
Yeah, and I don't think that's unfair. Like, Utah, I would say, is a very good defensive front. They don't have like that plethora of pros. I mean, Tavondre Sweat and all the other guys in the middle. Ethan Burke's playing really, really well. Barron Sorrell's obviously really great. Texas is just so deep. They're so loaded, and they're so physical. It will be something. Again, Washington's offensive line stood tall all year. They've been really good, but it will be interesting to see them. Like, this is their chance to prove they're one of the top in the world in the game, because this Texas defensive line is going to test you.
And my biggest thing I'm intrigued with is these Washington tackles are awesome. Like, they're NFL caliber tackles. You see them in NFL mock drafts where you kind of think Washington might be gettable in terms of pass protection. And Washington Husky fans have agreed with this in the comment section at times, is on the inside. And you look at Texas and where the majority of their pass rush is getting after it, it is from the inside. I mean, Tavondre Sweat, I think, there's a strong argument. He's the best defensive player in all of the country. You have a guy like Byron Murphy. You have a guy like Alfred Collins. Like, this is a interior Texas defensive line that they're all those guys that I just named are averaging a 15% or higher pass rush win rate. Can Washington, the tackles might be able to match up. Can they match up on the inside against what I think is probably the best interior defensive line that you see in all the country? And that's coming from a Michigan fan.
Yeah, and you gotta keep guys out of Penix's lap, because he's got to have a clean pocket to throw from. Because again, he's not a guy who likes to move around that much, and I'm not saying he can, but he really does want to sit there and be able to pick you apart. That's his game at the end of the day. He doesn't want to be flushed. That's not when Washington's on rhythm and doing their thing. He's sitting there pretty clean for the most part. So that, yeah, at the end of the day, that will be the test for them. And I also think it's a little underrated I think it's very important that Washington runs the ball. I think that's a big part of how they've kept him relatively upright for most of the year. Because when you can add that threat that Washington really hasn't had in other years, you can be really dangerous. And right now, with the way Dylan Johnson and that offensive line are playing, they've been really effective. But front seven, and when you throw in these linebackers for Texas, they're really hard to run on.
One of the questions I have on the note sheet is Washington has had a ton of Dylan Johnson just put on one of the more, I mean, he was banged up and ran on an Oregon defense that was very good in that front seven against the run. And when Washington has maybe gone through some struggles in terms of pushing the ball down the field in their passing attack, they've leaned on Dylan Johnson, former Mississippi State running back transfer. Can they lean on him against a Texas defense that when you look at the numbers throughout the season, they just showed it against Oklahoma State and Ollie Gordon, one of the best running backs in the country. They're allowing less than 3 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Can the Huskies run it against the Texas Longhorns front seven that we've already talked about their defensive line, but you mentioned Jalen Ford, Anthony Hill, phenomenal linebackers. Going to be another question. And the last thing you want to talk about is the cornerbacks. The Texas cornerbacks they're young. Guys like Terrence Brooks, guys like true freshman Malik Muhammad, they're young, but they've been playing extremely well. And you're looking at probably the best wide receiving core, arguably the best wide receiving core in the country, with guys like Roma Duzne, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk. Can these Texas DBs, the young ones, match up against these Washington wide receivers? Probably that last question that you're looking at with this matchup.
And you're probably looking at Washington like this is kind of the area you probably have your best shot to go beat them. And again, they played really well for Texas, but you have seen moments where they're a little bit grabby, giving up a couple of big plays, giving up some yards to Oklahoma, obviously. And then Oklahoma State, I mean, you did see some penalties, some big plays, and you got a guy in Roma Dunze who is as good as anyone when the ball's in the air. I think he's right up there with Marvin Harrison. I know you disagree with that a little bit, but he is, I mean, he's masterful at it. And you do have young cornerbacks who, have shown that if you can get behind them, they might grab on, they might take a penalty here and there. And if you do that to Washington, or that's a problem against some of these other teams, Washington can exploit that, I think.
If you're Washington, that's where you're going at. Yeah, I don't know if you're trying to get the ball out of his hands quick because you have a pass rush that's going to get after it. You have a front seven that's really hard to run the football against, where you're probably picking your matchup. And again, styles make fights and personnel matchups make games. You're probably saying we think we have the advantage with our wide receivers going up against a bunch of young defensive backs. And I'm not saying Texas defensive backs are bad. I'm more just giving a ton of credit to the Washington wide receivers. If you're Grubbin and Kalen DeBoer, you're trying to get the ball out quick to the perimeter, force these young guys to make plays on the football, tackle in space. And if they can do that, they're going to be hard to beat. But you're kind of leaning on your guys that have gotten you here to win those matchups.
And another thing I'm looking for from Washington is just to kind of get back to exactly what they did against Oregon, where they hit every portion of the field, because that's when they're dangerous. And when you've seen Washington stagnate a little bit on offense, it's been like they're not attacking all four quadrants, if you will.
And players, like not just portions of the field, but players, right? I mean, like when Washington struggled, they're just going to Roman. That's not a bad guy to go to, right? He is one of the best wide receivers in the country, but Polk and McMillan kind of, I know, obviously dealing with some injuries, but also weren't as involved when Washington's been struggling on offense. You're going to have all three of those guys healthy, and you want that box score to look like what we talked about Friday night, where all of them are kind of involved in that passing attack. Flipping sides here, I want to talk about this Texas offense first that has stagnated at times, but when you see them reach that top gear, like you saw against Texas Tech, like you saw against Oklahoma State, this is an offense that Quinn Ewers is coming off his best game as a Texas Longhorn. They're starting to put it together. How does Washington match up against the Texas offense that's starting to find a little bit of rhythm here?
And that'll be like, because one thing I was kind of thinking about when I'm thinking, okay, how's Texas match up? You look at what Utah was able to do to Washington, I should say, a little bit. Like that creativity, being able to use screens and involve some of like guys like Sione Vaki at a big game and then go take your shots deep down the field. I feel like that's almost to a T what I think Texas fans want to see is being able to, again, base your offense. Like when they were doing that to Oklahoma State, there was just nothing they can do. And then you get a guy like A.D. Mitchell open downfield. You get a guy like Xavier Worthy open downfield. That was a recipe that worked for Utah. And Utah can't do it like Texas. They don't have the horsepower that Texas has. But that kind of game feels like it should be what Texas sort of models what they do off of it.
You talk about some misdirection and screens. I mean, we just saw Coach Sark absolutely in his bag with those kind of concepts against Oklahoma State. And I think if the biggest thing you're nervous about with Washington and you're excited about if you're a Texas Longhorn fan is Coach Sark has a month to kind of script up this game. He's getting in the lab, looking at what Washington does on defense. This is one of the best play callers in all of college football. He has a month to script up this offense. You're going to have some bags of tricks. You're going to see some screens, some end around, some plays, some dialed up big plays from Texas, kind of similar to what you saw against Oklahoma State. And that's a dangerous Texas offense. Now, the Washington Huskies on defense had a phenomenal performance against
that's the best game I've seen Washington play on defense by a mile. I thought they were awesome against Oregon.
And you look at what they did everything. I mean, that's an Oregon offense that I was saying for a time I thought was the best offense, and I still might even believe that. Like that offense is incredible for Oregon. They can, and kind of very similar to Texas. They can run the football, they can hit the big play through the air, things that Texas does well on offense as well. But if you're Washington and you just shut out a guy like Troy Franklin, had Bucky Irvin had 9 carries for 20 yards, you're looking to replicate some of that. And I think what doesn't get talked about enough is you talk about all the NFL talent for Washington on offense. They got that NFL talent on defense as well. Guys like Braylon Trice starting to play his best football towards the end of the season. A crop of linebackers that are flying around the football field, playing physical, then arguably one of the best cornerbacks in the country who just kind of locked down Troy Franklin and Jabbar Muhammad. If you're Washington, you feel like this defense can hang with Texas even if they're reaching that top gear here.
Well, the big thing is you saw them tackling on the perimeter when when Oregon was trying to go lateral, and you kind of saw when Texas, they've gone to that lateral game a little bit, especially as of late, and that's been working for them. But you see how athletic they are, how good their cornerback, and I thought that was something they struggled with at times, frankly, was tackling in space. But you saw guys like Raylan Goforth have a big game. I thought the linebackers, all of them were going sideline to sideline. So they have that. They're a very athletic defense. They're a very aggressive defense at times. In that kind of game, again, when we talk about what Washington needs to do, they play like they did against Oregon and tackle that effectively and don't give up the big play that efficiently. They can be a really, really dangerous defense because you're right. When they can kind of pin their ears back and use those two defensive ends and get after quarterbacks, they can be really dangerous.
That's the last storyline I have in my note sheet is Quinn Ewers is at his best when he has that clean pocket. And I thought Quinn Ewers did a phenomenal job stepping up, maneuvering in that pocket, and delivering the ball down the field. When Quinn Ewers struggles, it's because the pocket's mucky and he doesn't have that ability to step up and use all that arm talent that he has. If you're Washington, you're trying to, because this is a very good offensive line for Texas. We probably should have talked about that, but guys like Calvin Banks and DJ, this is a very good Texas offensive line. How are you scheming up pressure against Quinn Ewers? Because that's probably, if you're trying to get this Texas team to stagnate a little bit, get off their rhythm on the offensive side of the football, it's getting Quinn Ewers off his spot. Braylon Trice, ZTF, some of those guys on the inside, and maybe even bringing some safety or backers on some blitzes is probably going to be the answer for the Huskies to kind of slow down this Texas defense or offense.
And you're right, because like when Ewers, like he'll take a sack here and there, he'll throw an interception here and there when things are getting a little chaotic on him. And that, again, Washington, I feel like, has done a pretty good job of creating a bit of chaos. And I think that's been the one unit that you kind of think about when you think improvement for what Washington's been doing. That defensive line's just way stepped up their game. I think they stop the run effectively. They get after the passer effectively. And that has allowed them to put some pressure on quarterbacks and make guys like Bo Nix, who's been very, very efficient all year, kind of look pedestrian, especially in that first half they played.
Yeah, this one is going to be extremely fun. Bill, let's get to the pick here. Texas 4.5-point favorites against the Huskies. Vegas just very little respect for the Washington Huskies. I'll ask you where you lean in here.
My gut almost wants to take the Huskies just because I think they've been wildly disrespected all year. People, again, like they've played close games against bad teams. Everybody's done that. You've seen Michigan do that. You've seen Bama do that. You've seen Texas do that, frankly, too. It happens to everybody, but when it happens to Washington, people freak out. The way they dominated Oregon, I would say in that second game, makes me very encouraged that this Washington team, when they're all three wideouts are healthy and they're playing in rhythm and doing the things they can do, they're so dangerous. But I'll go Washington, but my one worry is the physicality because I just don't think they've seen anything really close to what Texas is.
This Washington team's awesome. And many of the listeners know I took Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, and that has nothing to do with me. I really do like this Washington team. I'm going to go Texas here. And why I'm going Texas is I think you're seeing this team play their best football down the stretch. And my biggest concern is I don't think Washington has seen a front four be able to get pressure because that offensive line for Washington is very good. Get pressure on Michael Penix and be as dominant as this Texas team. I think this is the best defensive line they have seen. And so I think they're going to be able to get Michael Penix off their spot. I'm going to trust the young cornerbacks to kind of make some stops and make some plays on the football. I'm going to lean Texas here. You're going to lean Washington. Going to be either way, cut it. It's going to be a phenomenal game. Very excited for this one. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If you do enjoy the content, again, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.